In case you aren't familiar with it, GTO follows the exploits of Onizuka Eikichi, 22 years old. A one-time biker gang member on a quest to reform his life and become Japan's greatest teacher. In his quest, he is made responsible for the most criminally delinquent class of students at the prestigious Holy Forest Academy Middle School, which has already driven several previous teachers to psychotic breaks and suicide. The central conflict of the show revolves around Onizuka's attempts to slowly unwind the Gordian knot of trauma, mistrust, and alienation in his students, and one by one, save them from loneliness and despair. Onizuka is easily one of my favorite manga protagonists of all time. He changed my life when I first saw the show when I was 16, and then defined my choice to become a high school teacher years later. And that's despite the fact that he's the sneakiest, slimiest, ugliest, creepiest motherfucker to ever grace my screen. Seriously, props to Tooru Fujisawa, the mangaka. He draws the grossest faces I have ever seen. Onizuka's grossness goes well beyond skin deep too. The man is a degenerate sociopath at best and a legitimate maniac at worst. Over the course of the series, Onizuka has become a high school teacher with the express purpose of committing statutory rape, tried to bang a student's mom, taunting him about it the entire time, driven a student off an incomplete bridge, trussed students up in sleeping bags and waterboarded them, suplexed an elderly man paralyzing him for life, attempted to murder a police officer, made this face, goaded a teenager into jumping off a bridge. And that's just the first 20 episodes or so. Somehow though, despite all that, he's still one of the most compassionate characters ever written. While his heroism, moral code, and sheer will are certainly awesome, it's his capacity to forgive and empathize that set him apart. No one is ever too low or despicable for Onizuka. He will climb down into the pits of hell to rescue the most psychotic, subhuman pieces of shit imaginable. And not in a Batman, you're scum and you're going to Arkham Asylum kind of way. He doesn't just bring divine retribution, he seeks to reform and rehabilitate the soul. Probably because he's pretty much a depraved Neanderthal himself and hypocrisy is in his style. He's been there and done it all. And in seeking to save his students from his colleagues, he's trying to redeem his own soul. He does all this by wearing his heart on his sleeve and his guts on his collar. In the end, it's his love that breaks the barriers his students have erected against the adult world, allowing him to reach them in a way that no one else can. It's cheesy, hippy-dippy, and it's what made him my idol. Onizuka also doesn't give a fuck. He's been through dangerous shit. He's lived life in the gutter, he's been screwed over, alienated, and ostracized his entire life. And in the end, he's come out bulletproof. Literally, the man is a damn cockroach. Since he could care less about his reputation or his status, he isn't afraid to transgress, to do what must be done, even in the face of the PTA associations, school boards, governments, or even the superstructures of our civilization that threaten his way of being. In my opinion, he's one of the best male role models out there, except for the pedophile thing, or the harassment thing. You know what, forget I said that. He is a terrible role model. But as much as Onizuka doesn't give a fuck, he actually gives way more fucks than most people today. If you're confused, bear with me for a moment. It's only because Onizuka couldn't care less about any kind of authority, dogma, or boundaries that he's able to surmount the vast gulf that exists between his alienated students and the adult world. It's his capacity not to give a fuck that allows him to be real. Real in a way that students today sorely lack.
菊池よ、頼みがある。これよ。何？この写真と俺の秘蔵の雑誌でさ、作ってくんねえか？その首のすげ替え写真。はあ。
In the quest for perfect role models and high efficiency education, not to mention the carefully curated social media reality we interact with for a huge chunk of our lives, what students and children experience now is a world devoid of imperfection and human fallibility. They look around at their teachers and see no vestiges of humanity behind their eyes. Teachers seem like joyless mouthpieces of the status quo. You almost never see their flaws, their failings, their personal struggles, their addictions, or even their true feelings. Most teachers are so terrified to be fired, they almost never speak their mind, voice their true opinions, or reveal their emotions.
But you were unsuccessful?
Obviously.
Onizuka, on the other hand, straight up smokes cigarettes in the classroom and enslaves his students for harebrained treasure hunting expeditions. I'm not saying giving your students cancer or getting them eaten alive in the jungle is a-okay. I'm just saying that to me, it was always refreshing to come across a teacher that seemed as flawed as I was.
よし、それじゃあしょうがねえ。俺も男だ。最後の奥の手を使ってやるよ。内臓ウルフ。な腸なら10メートルぐらいあるらしいからよ。メーター100万ぐらいで売りゃ。スピーカーコードじゃねえんだよ。
Back in high school, those teachers saved my life. Helped me realize I wasn't crazy or alone. That kind of honesty and realness engendered the formation of genuine relationships and bonds between the teachers and students, which far surpassed the importance and value of anything else that happened at school. In a world of hyper-efficiency, time crunch, and extreme levels of stress, depression, and other mental illness, where workers and particularly teachers are overworked to the point of cognitive decline and apathy, Onizuka's spirit remains unbroken and sensitive.
しまってくれ。いいから早くじゃねえと本当に使っちまうだろうが。
何言ってんのよ。あと数時間もすれば残り4日になっちゃうのよ。800万なんて作れるわけないでしょ。
そうだよ先生、使ってよ。
バカ野郎。教師が生徒に金借りてどうすんだよ。何心配すんだ。俺は男だぜ。
He does not become deaf to the suffering of his fellow man or woman and always comes through for the students he is responsible for, in his own imperfect way. I cannot tell you how many times I had to turn a blind eye to students that I knew were hurting because I had to complete the curriculum, or I was buried under corrections, or just because I was so emotionally and psychologically drained, I couldn't muster the courage or energy to do the right thing.
先行ってよ。都合のいい時ばっか生徒になりやがって。なめんじゃねえぞてめえら。教師だって人間だよ。ムカつく時もありゃ切れる時もあるんだよ。
I'll get into this a little bit more later in the video, but for now suffice it to say that kind of stress breaks spirits and leads people down a dark road to total apathy. In the end, it was Onizuka's resilience, humor, and kindness in the face of hardship that inspired me to become a teacher. Obviously, anyone that tries to emulate Onizuka in the real world would be instantly arrested and probably murdered too.
俺は何やってるんだ！これじゃ土曜アイドル殺人鬼じゃねえか！
He is an iconoclast, one that can only really exist between the panels of a manga. Onizuka's message is incredibly simple: to live your life with an open heart and to live in the present moment. Onizuka is always dealing with students who are under intense pressure to achieve greatness and focus on their futures instead of their present. It's incredibly relatable how all the students are encouraged to pursue ideal lives charted out meticulously by their parents, teachers, and their society. And in that pursuit, students are encouraged to sacrifice their happiness, to sacrifice their youth, so they can enjoy wealth and status later in life. Something I've been told to do so many times in my life.
Rich people don't sleep 8 hours a day. That's a third of your life. It ain't but 24 hours in a day. You cannot be sleep 8 hours a day.
But Onizuka stands stalwart against this kind of thinking. He believes school is life and life is to be lived completely. You never get your childhood back, no matter how many billions you make as an adult. And most importantly, as an adult, you never make the kind of friends you make in high school. It is a monstrous crime to burden a teenager to the point where their social lives and their social skills decay and atrophy. That might sound like hyperbole, but that's exactly what I see in India. Entire generations of friendships and romances are falling before the scythe of engineering college prep and MBA exams. Onizuka says F all that. Live in the now, get your heart broken, don't be too much of a pussy to chase your own dreams. And love your friends. They're more important than all the money and status in the world. I ignored all these messages for most of my life and lived to regret it. Oops. When I decided to become a teacher, a huge part of it was the hope that I could help communicate those messages to as many students as possible, and maybe spare a few kids a lifetime of loneliness. While Onizuka is the best part of the show, Onizuka would be nothing without his students. The characters that populate Onizuka's classroom are timeless archetypes and perfect composites of everyone I've ever known. And it is Onizuka's conflict and interplay with these brilliantly written juvenile delinquents that elevate the show from a good manga with a strong shonen protagonist to something I consider a masterpiece. While the entire supporting cast is excellent, my favorite side characters in GTO are Kanzaki Urumi, the hyper-intelligent femme fatale,
あんたたち一人2000万合わせて6000万そのうち鬼塚の背負った800万の借金分がこっちに入るって寸法よ。金銭目的の誘拐ってやつ当然よね。あんたたちがまいた種だもんね。
and Hiroshi Uchiyamada, the vice principal of Onizuka's school and his eternal nemesis. Kanzaki is a young genius whose trauma has turned her into something of a supervillain. Naturally, she struggled to fit in at school by virtue of her sizable intellect, which alienates her from people her own age, leading her to commit petty acts of terrorism when the mood is right, like selling off several of her classmates as sex slaves. She has a dark streak, a sociopathy that awakens in the face of difficult emotions or interpersonal drama. For all her smarts, she's just a scared little girl that's terrified of her own feelings and haunted by the rejection she faced from her own mother. She is racked with existential dread at the meaninglessness of it all. A feeling compounded by the fact that her only trusted confidant, her primary school teacher, humiliates her in front of her own class. That rejection and alienation leads Kanzaki to the edge of suicide.
先生、私の父親のこと知ってんでしょ？そうよ。私は結婚なんてしたくない母親が優秀な子供が欲しくて、愛情なんて全くないところで生まれてきたタンパク質の合成体。人間なんてただの遺伝子の箱舟に過ぎないのよ。そして死んだらタンパク質の塊に戻るだけ。ただそれだけ。
Onizuka's solution is simple. Call her nihilistic bluff. In the end, Kanzaki feels her apathy dissolving before a groundswell of repressed emotion, and she is reminded of the fact that she's afraid to die, and by corollary, that she wants to live and be accepted by those around her. It's cheesy and surreal and absolutely awesome. This arc really resonated with me, being a bit of a drama queen that flirts with casual suicidal thoughts myself. Every once in a while, some people just need a healthy jolt to the system to shatter the dystopian psychic narratives they've accepted as reality. It's definitely not always the right approach for someone struggling with suicidal thoughts, and if you're struggling with depression, I'd obviously suggest you seek real professional help. But it's Onizuka's ability to reach past the intellectual, down into the murky depths of Kanzaki's subjective emotional experience that allow him to break through her staunch apathy. As always, this storyline would definitely have landed Onizuka in prison or worse in any real-world context, but as a story, it's a cathartic masterstroke. As a teacher, I think the reason Onizuka's deranged attempts to rehabilitate his students are so inspiring is because they are a reminder of what's actually at stake when students fall into intense isolation or mental health issues, and the kind of insane effort it can take to meaningfully help people like that.
たく何も死ぬのが怖くねえだよ。そうやって頭で分かったふりしてるやつは一番腹立つんだ。臆病者のくせに。生きてくことすら怖くてしょうがねえ臆病者のくせによ。
Too often in the schools I've worked in, I would hear empty words about the emotional health of the student or about their holistic development, but the stark reality and depressing logistics of the situation made it impossible to achieve anything like a healthy environment for the students, let alone being able to take the time to provide students with the individual attention they deserved. And for students with genuine mental health or socio-emotional challenges, forget about it. They are abandoned by the wayside like roadkill for all practical intents and purposes.
あんた、仮にも私らの担任でしょ。生徒助けんの教師の仕事よ。
あうかおめえ。仕事なら5時半のチャイムでとっくに終了してんよバーロー。普段は先行舐め切ったような態度ばっか取ってるくせに困った時は助けてくださいだ。
And even if the schools were given all the funding in the universe and every teacher was compassionate and highly trained, I still don't think modern education would be able to address a lot of the issues that GTO is pointing to. What it comes down to, in the end, is ideology. The problem is the philosophical beliefs and ideological stances of educational institutions today. What is education? What should be taught? Is school just preparation for working life? What constitutes a good life? What is our purpose on this planet? To all these questions, the status quo provides an answer. Schools are vehicles of that status quo. And if you don't happen to agree with the answers to those questions which your school provides, God help you, because you are in for a hellish childhood. Which brings me to my second favorite character in GTO, Vice Principal Uchiha Mada. He is the quintessential modern educator, the manifestation of the popular consensus of today.
クズをクズと言って何が悪い。それとも何かね、お前たちがグレたのは私の責任だとでも言うのか。冗談もほどほどにしたまえ。所詮お前たちは少年から腐りきった救いようのないクズなんだ。鬼塚君、早く何とかしてまえ。ぶちのめしたっていいんだぞ。
He is authoritarian, selfish, judgmental, paranoid, hyper-efficient, and manipulative. His ambitions revolve wholly around the acquisition of commodities, specifically a Toyota Cresta, which he believes will alchemically transform his nightmarish, loveless existence into a paradise. He plays favorites and only pays attention to the students who he believes may one day amount to something. In other words, he is obsessed with achievement and clearly believes that school is merely a stepping stone to a career of work. He also sees the school as the enforcer of the government's project of social engineering, a factory to maximize the productivity of the future workforce of their nation. In Vice Principal Uchiha Mada, we find the answers the status quo provides for the questions I raised before. What is education? The transformation of children into efficient workers, of course. What should be taught? Whatever helps you get a job. Is school just preparation for work life? Duh. What constitutes a good life? Money, possessions, and status. What is our purpose on this planet? To achieve as much material success as possible, regardless of the emotional, social, or environmental impact of our actions. And all the while, Uchiha Mada presents himself as a paragon of justice and ethical education. He genuinely believes he is the hero of the tale, and that Onizuka is a villain he must thwart if divine justice is to prevail. Despite the fact that deep down, Uchiha Mada is way more of a degenerate perv than Onizuka. He reminded me so much of the vice principal from my high school days. The bastard even looked like Uchiha Mada with that bald pate and the sour expression. And I always wondered why. Why men like Uchiha Mada see themselves as the good guy. How can they imagine that their cruelty, bullying, and terrorizing of children is an act of kindness or righteousness? GTO manages to communicate the psychology of those fascist VPs perfectly. The impotence, the pathetic personal lives, the broken dream,
だが気をつけねばならん。学校にはあいつがいる。この車を何度も壊したあの悪魔が。
the repressed sexuality, and the years of cynical disillusionment.
何をしているんだ私は。生徒を疑ったりして。うまくいかないことがあると私は生徒を憎み、同僚の教師を憎み、社会を憎んでいた。悪いのは人を信じられなくなったこの私じゃないか。
He's basically the teacher that Pink Floyd was singing about. I don't think I'll ever get sick of watching Onizuka demolish Uchiyamada's car in a series of increasingly convoluted ways, or watching Uchiyamada achieve new levels of Super Saiyanhood thanks to the rages Onizuka inspires in him. Oh, and the suplex. I watch this every time I'm feeling low or despairing at the pitiful state of the education system and fuming at all the bastards that make it impossible to change it. It makes me smile every time. I can't possibly go over every character in the show or how wonderfully they encapsulate some archetypical struggle that students face, or the cogent social critique Tooru Fujisawa provides in every arc. But they're all fantastic. Check it out, especially if you're a teacher. I promise you there is nothing like it on the planet. But beware, there is a very real possibility that watching or reading GTO will convert you to the cult of Onizuka-ism, and you may feel a strange compulsion to become a high school teacher. If this happens, don't panic, it should pass in a week or two, and you can avoid the dystopian nightmare of becoming an educator. But if the symptoms persist past 6 months, my condolences. There is nothing anyone can do for you anymore. You are a teacher now. The GTO manga hit the pages of Shonen Jump in 1997, with its anime adaptation following in 1999. Quick tip though, if you're really curious about the show, the manga is way better than the anime adaptation, especially the ending, since they had to truncate the ending for the anime. GTO is primarily a slapstick comedy with some action elements, but where the show really shines is in its slice-of-life depictions of high school and its vicious social critique. Lurking beneath the facade of outrageous jokes and hyperreal drama is a deeply heartfelt and heartbreaking analysis of modern life and modern education. GTO is set in a time when incredible hardship, loneliness, and despair were seeping through the roots of Japanese society and youth culture.
In late 1990s Japan, a new term has emerged that describes people which refuse to take part in society and often even to leave their bedroom or apartment. This term is hikikomori. Hikikomori usually do not work and have as little social contact with other people as possible.
Following the economic recession in 1991, from which Japan still hasn't fully recovered, a whole generation of students were finding themselves jobless and alienated, not to mention straight up suicides. There's a lot of research and academic writing that's been done on the subject of the looming pandemic of stress and depression that plagues our society, but one of the best pieces I have read on the subject is an essay called The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han. Han is specifically critiquing the societal norms surrounding achievement and toxic work culture he observes in Korea, but the criticism and analysis he offers is equally applicable to most other parts of the world, especially Japan. According to Han, we have all willingly subjugated ourselves to what he calls the free constraint of maximal achievement.
Beutet man sich freiwillig und leidenschaftlich aus, bis man zusammenbricht.
That is, the inevitable result of freedom in a world where achievement and capital gains are held as the end-all and be-all of existence is self-exploitation in the pursuit of achievement. It's not just that the world tells you how you should be living, it's telling you how you can and therefore must live. Why not work an extra hour after your job? Why not sign up for internships during your summer holidays? Why not sacrifice your youth in pursuit of a better life as an adult?
We both have day jobs. I'm in school. I'm going to be a freshman in high school.
When you're free in a competitive society, why wouldn't you optimize yourself to near breaking point to achieve the best life you can? And since the measure of a good life these days amounts to the dollar value of the commodities you can buy, it's pretty clear you must always choose work over leisure. It's this kind of thinking that pervades the authority figures in GTO. Onizuka's central disagreement with these wizened veterans is that school should be an experience complete unto itself. In Onizuka's own words, it is better to have lived 4 good years in high school than to live 40 years as a miserable adult. I know that might sound ridiculous to a lot of you, but I tend to really agree with Onizuka here. It is mind-boggling how many people essentially barter their youth for a shot at becoming a millionaire, pursuing careers they have no interest or passion for. This kind of thinking has far surpassed any kind of traditional immigrant mindset or Protestant work ethic. Today, the ooze of motivation and hustle culture are sublimating through our very pores. The grind is our religion, efficiency is our goddess, and we work 365 days a year, no days off, embracing the grind. Hashtag hustling, hashtag working my ass off, hashtag help, hashtag I'm dying over here. Another concept Han talks about in the Burnout Society is the idea of the loss of otherness. Basically, in our free society, our degree of freedom can be measured by our ability to reduce the possibility for intrusion by anyone or anything outside ourselves. That is, other people, other institutions, or governments. In other words, get off my lawn. In other words, I'm alright Jack, keep your hands off my stash. In Onizuka, this is reflected by the students' intense alienation. They hate and distrust authority to the point where they have isolated themselves from everyone around them and would love to see the world burn. They are so terrified of other people or otherness in general that they can't bring themselves to open their heart enough to let anyone in. So there is no possibility for friendship, love, or community. This kind of subtle observational analysis of deep foundational issues in modern society, couched in a facade of comedy, is extremely unusual in anime these days. That's why I think Great Teacher Onizuka is still just as relevant as it was 25 years ago when it first came out. It's also troubling that the trends Tooru Fujisawa was commenting on in the 90s have all gotten way worse today. Depression, anxiety, loneliness, burnout, self-harm, and suicide are all up pretty much everywhere in the world, and education is as broken as ever. And that's what did it. That's what compelled me to get my teaching certificate and go teach at a high school.
You cannot learn from books.
I had seen the best and the worst of education. I went to a very good experimental school that kind of aligned with a lot of the things Onizuka was saying in GTO, and knew how amazing school could be when you had good teachers backed by an ethical, compassionate organization. But I also watched my mother, who was also a high school teacher, slowly losing her optimism and becoming jaded and cynical about the education system.
Is there something wrong with your table?
I hated watching my mom lose her optimism, and I wanted to do something about it. Then, around the time I was choosing whether to pursue a master's degree or figure out how to get a job in some giant corporation making lots of money, I happened to see Onizuka again. And it literally brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I knew there was really nothing more meaningful that I could do with my life. And that was it. I knew I had to become a teacher. But once I did, I realized just how titanically outmatched I was before the challenges I was facing. And frankly, it's kind of broken my spirit. Fortunately, revisiting GTO has inspired a few rays of hope in me. Onizuka exemplified what's possible when love is at the heart of our actions rather than fear and logic. He's a man's man, a badass amongst badasses, an enlightened Zen master that walks amongst us. Which is what makes a ray of hope like Onizuka so valuable. None of us can change this system overnight or relieve the suffering of the entire world single-handed. Despair is pretty common and fairly inevitable in the face of all that, and sometimes the only antidote to nihilism is a nice shot of humor and hope injected directly into our eyeballs.
きっと愛の力ですよ。鬼塚先生には大きな愛の力が。
殺してやる！殺してやる！神崎の野郎、いつか殺してやる！
Whether you're a kid struggling in class or a jaded teacher on the verge of retirement, do yourself a favor and check out this show. It'll heal your soul and make you laugh. What more do you want? Wow, you made it to the end of the video. Congratulations, you have the concentration of a cybernetic Taoist. Like this video and subscribe if you'd like more content like this. I'd be stoked to keep making these. Let me know what you think of Onizuka in the comments. Is he a psycho or a savior? Hit the bell too if you're feeling extra spicy. To everyone that's already subscribed to the channel, I appreciate it. Sorry I took so long with this new video. It was a bit of a challenge, but I had a great time. Catch you in the next one.